Hello and welcome. My name is Matty, and once again, I'm very pleased to announce I'm joined by the great Ralph Ellis, and we're going to be building upon the previous talk regarding the story of Exodus, the true history of that. We also touched a bit upon Akhenaten and the story of Genesis as well too. And so we're going to continue on our theme of revisionary theology a little bit. How are you doing this week, Cardinal Ralph Ellis? I see you've changed
I'm
from
Cardinal today, just for a
yeah.
change. You know, I like to
Yeah.
change my preferred pronouns every now and then.
Very good.
Yeah, doing very well, thanks. Yeah, the last talks seemed to go quite well. No production issues, which is always good, and everyone seems to be
Yes.
quite interested in the discussions, which is again very good.
Yeah, fantastic. So we covered a lot of ground last time, so I thought it might be a good idea this week just to begin by with a little mind map, just to make sure everybody's following along on the story, if that sounds okay. So I'll call this up quickly, and we'll sort of just work through it a little bit, if that's all right, and then we'll take it from there. So we were starting with the story of Exodus here, and there was a few different accounts of what we were going through. So of course, there's the Old Testament story. We have the information from Josephus Flavius, who was the first century historian of that era of Judea. And he had access to documents from the temple, which the Romans had destroyed. And so this is where he became the authoritative source of that. We also have Pharaoh or Moses' Tempestella, which again is from 1550 BC. And he describes about, kicking out of the Hyksos. And he's describing other natural events like this volcano erupting that we went over last time. And so this story of the Exodus, there was two different types of Exodus. We had the first Exodus of the Hyksos, which is around 1650 to 1550 BC. And then we also have the second Exodus, which is of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, which was about 250 years later. My understanding was once the Hyksos were initially kicked out of Egypt, they went on to Jericho. This is the story of Moses leading his people out, splitting off the sea. And again, even if we look at mainstream archaeology, the date of the destruction of Jericho was about 1550 BC. So that was another thing that sort of correlates with our story previously. So when we were looking at this story of the Exodus, we were saying there was two Exodus stories. I just wanted to make sure we were all following correctly. So we have the first Exodus, which is again off the Hyksos. This led to them heading over to Jerusalem, starting again. And then we spoke a bit about how they returned back into Egypt for the second Exodus to occur. And we understood, I believe, that this was by the Joseph story, which was written in Genesis. This is the story where, he's sold into slavery. This is the Technicolor raincoat story. Ends up in the Pharaoh's court, interprets the Pharaoh's dreams and manages through the famine. This is how he becomes second in command. And he's renamed Zapneth Paneth, I believe. When we look at the historical record for who Joseph may have been, you had mentioned last time that he was Yuya from Yuya and Thuya. These were Egyptian aristocrats from the 18th dynasty, and they were the maternal grandparents of Akhenaten, and also the great grandparents of Tutankhamun, I believe. Joseph was also described as Ptah Seth in Manetho's records. Manetho ties back into Josephus Flavius again. This was this first century historian, so this is one of the older documents that he's referring to as the work of Manetho. Just going on from this then a little bit further, Josephus Flavius, again, this is the first century historian. He not only sources Manetho, and Manetho, for people who are unaware, was this Egyptian priest historian from the 3rd century. He described Moses as well at the time, who was the chief army commander. And another source of Josephus Flavius was Strabo, who was an ancient Greek geographer, and he was an authoritative source. Says Moses was a leader in Egypt, and he was the start of monotheism, and this led to the second Exodus. I've done this just to try to get my mind around a little bit. Is there anything jumping out, Ralph, that I've not got right so far there, or does that sort of sound?
Looks like a good synopsis of the Old Testament as narrated in my books. Yeah, very good.
Yeah. And just, so what I was maybe thinking about a little bit was this second Exodus. So this is where we have Akhenaten, Nefertiti. What was the reason that they were kicked out, Ralph? Was this just because of the change of the whole religion, this monotheism and those things, and that was just seen as sort of corrupting the previous or offensive to the old gods and whatnot? Is that correct?
Yes, there was a great outcry against the change in religion because he had closed down all of the temples, let alone got rid of all of the multitude of gods. but he had closed down all of the temples as well. So you can imagine the temple priesthood as being one of the most powerful sectors within society. You've got the monarchy and then the priesthood, and they're virtually the same in their power structure. And it closed them all down. There was a lot of people very angry with this. All the temples have been closed. All of the people who would normally be employed by the temple structure had all been made unemployed. Lots of disgruntled people, especially down south in Thebes. And so there were a lot of people that wanted to get rid of the heretic pharaoh, who was Akhenaten. And they eventually did. They managed to get rid of them. There was plans to undermine his monarchy. We went through the killing of all the male children, which happened in the Exodus story, with the killing of all of the Israelite boys, but also happened with Akhenaten because he only ever had girls, six girls and no boys. And that was achieved by the midwives. I forget their names for a minute. Anyway, the two midwives that were killing the Israelite boys. And then eventually there was an uprising effectively against it, and they had to go into exile. Now, a lot of people will say that Akhenaten died, but there has been no evidence that Akhenaten and Nefertiti died in Amarna or in Thebes or anywhere else. They simply sort of go missing from history. No mummy has been identified as the mummy of Akhenaten. There have been various, like KV55 and others, but there's many reasons for thinking that they are not the mummy of Akhenaten. So there is no evidence for his demise in Egypt. And the other records, like Scotti Chronicon, which we will talk about in another story, in another talk, seem to indicate that they went on an exile. So, and Manetho does as well. So Manetho sort of narrates this second Exodus, which he is talking about Amarna. Although he doesn't name Akhenaten, it's pretty obvious he's talking about the Amarna dynasty. And they were pushed out on a second Exodus, a smaller Exodus, and ended up going north again to Avaris initially, which is Pi Ramesses, the stronghold of the Hyksos dynasty, and beyond. And so we have the second smaller Exodus that you're going to talk about here.
Yeah, sounds good. And so where have we got up to the story then? Where does this lead on from? I think we've covered. I think most people are probably up
so
to
we
where
had
we
this
are with
smaller
it.
Exodus.
Yeah.
Of the 80,000 maimed priests and lepers.
Mm-hmm. And these are both combined in this biblical story of the Exodus with it. Both of these have
yes,
emerged,
and these have been
the
combined, in the biblical story of the Exodus.
Actually, just before we go forward, I just wanted to double check who Moses was exactly. Then do you see this as a conflagration of a couple of figures?
Not really. A lot of people said that Moses was Akhenaten himself because he was the master of monotheism, of course. So the similarities were stark, and people said that Moses must be Akhenaten. I think that he was actually Akhenaten's brother, because the brother of Akhenaten was called Moses. So we have the two brothers. In the biblical record, we get Aaron and Moses are the two brothers who led the Exodus. And in the historical record, we get Akhenaten and Tuthmosis, the two brothers who went on the second Exodus out of Amarna. And then we have, your second Exodus story. And they're scattered around the Mediterranean. We have that story from Scotti Chronicon, which we will talk about later. Some of them went up to Avaris, which is Pi Ramesses, and probably on towards, Judea, Israel, that sort of region. But they were forced out of Egypt. Again, I think this was an agreement to go. That's how Scotty Chronicon records it, that they were advised to go, otherwise life would get very difficult for them. And they were given ships, 60 ships, and told to go on their way. And that was the exodus, not of Akhenaten, that was the exodus of Ai, who was the next pharaoh after Tutankhamun, who was of the Amarna dynasty. Again, he was of the same family. So in this smaller exodus, we actually had two exoduses. We had the exodus of Akhenaten and his brother Tuthmosis, and then only about 20 years later, we had the exodus of Ai and Ankhesenamun, and they were pushed out as well on another small exodus. So yeah, this family were not best liked by the establishment within Egypt, and they were pushed out of Egypt. And hence we have the Old Testament story. Basically, it basically comes from them. This is where monotheism comes from, and it's their history, their memories of their trials and tribulations in Egypt. And they come back again. So it's not over. We've had a major exodus and two minor exoduses, and they've been pushed out, and they come back again. And they come back via the Sea People invasion. So what is the Sea? We'll go through this. It's a separate story that needs a separate book, and I've not written this book. But anyway, just in broad brush outline, the Sea People invasion is a confederacy of all of the islands in the Mediterranean who gang up and destroy Egypt. Now, why on earth would they want to do that? Well, first of all, what is this 1,000-ship invasion? Well, we have that in the Iliad story, don't we? The invasion of Troy. How many times in this same era, because we're talking about the same era, do the islands of the Mediterranean gang up with 1,000 ships to go and destroy somewhere? Well, that's the invasion of Troy, isn't it? As being given to us. But even Herodotus says that it was mainly aimed at Egypt and not necessarily Troy. I think they're one and the same. The Sea People invasion is the 1,000-ship invasion of Troy. It's the same story. It's just been slightly misidentified. We've seen this before with the misidentification of the Exodus story. And I think they've misidentified the 1,000-ship invasion. It was actually the Sea People invasion of the Levant and Egypt. Now, why did they want to do that? Why do all of the islands of the Mediterranean gang up on the superpower, Egypt, of the sort of Bronze Age? Well, because they were exiled Hyksos. They were the exiles from the Hyksos Exodus, from the Amarna Exodus, from the Skota Exodus, who had been scattered across the islands of the Mediterranean. They'd had a couple of 100 years, in some cases 400 years, in order to gather their strength together, become militarily fairly strong, and then gang up together to regain their previous homeland, which was Egypt. So that gives us an explanation for why we had the Sea People invasion, which devastated Egypt. I mean, it was successful. They didn't get down to Thebes, but they conquered the whole of the Nile Delta, Lower Egypt. And so again, we had this invading people who started a new dynasty, which is the 21st, 22nd dynasties of Egypt. We're talking 950, 1000 BC here, the very time of the United Monarchy. So we now go into the United Monarchy, obviously, is of King David and King Solomon, very famous stories in the Old Testament. But there is a problem, as ever, with these stories. They are missing from the historical record. Now, if you read Finkelstein and Silberman, two very eminent Israeli historians, they will say that in this very time, 10th century BC, Jerusalem was no more than a village. How does a village have, the greatest kingdom, the most powerful and respected monarchs in the whole of this region at this time? It doesn't. So there is a problem. Solomon and David are missing from the historical record completely. And so we're back in the same situation with the Exodus, missing from the historical record completely. How do we find them? Well, with the Exodus, we changed the chronology slightly. With the United Monarchy of David and Solomon, all I've done is change the location. The timeline is exactly the same. Timeline does not change. But instead of them being the kings of Zion, I think they were the kings of Zoan, which is Tanis in Egypt. Mentioned in the Bible, of course, but not as the capital city of the United Monarchy. But I think their capital city, they did control Judea as well. So that was a part of their kingdom. They actually conquered it later. But their capital city was in Zoan, which is Tanis. And we'll have a look at Tanis in a minute. So that's the broad brush, that this is a new dynasty again. Again, Egypt was divided once more between north and south. So we had this new dynasty in the north, in both records in a way. We had the Tanite kings, 21st, 22nd dynasty of Egypt. In the north, the new monarchy, and then the established monarchy down in Thebes again. So Egypt was divided. And I've written this in my book. And so here we have Solomon, Pharaoh of Egypt. It was originally called Falcon of Sheba, but I thought that was, it wasn't a very catchy name. So after the first year, because this goes back to about 2010, I think this is about 15 years old, I changed the name to Solomon, Pharaoh of Egypt. Again, do try to get the latest editions if you're looking at it. Fairly underrated book, I would say. It's not my bestseller. Maybe because the United Monarchy is not on the lips of most people. They're interested in the New Testament. They're interested in ancient Egypt, but nobody really cares much about the United Monarchy, apart from maybe, Judaic peoples. So it's a forgotten history, but I think this is quite a dramatic story because I've found King David and King Solomon in the historical record, which has never happened before. I mean, these are the lost kings. Although some people will say that this is evidence of King David, but it's not really. This is the Tel Dan Stela. And it mentions, you can see someone's just highlighted it in white down the bottom here. It mentions Bet-Duad. But Dude is the name of David. We put a V in there, but it can be a V or a W. And here it's normally pronounced as a dude with a W, as it were, not David. And that is a mention, apparently, of King David. It could be the city of David, actually, Bet-Duad. But even if it is King David, it doesn't tell us anything about David. All it is a mention of this king. It tells us nothing about the United Monarchy, where they were based, who they were, where they came from, their families. It tells us nothing. So the Tel Dan Stela is not evidence of the United Monarchy, apart from there was a guy called Dude or David. I found this interesting. This is an 19th century painting of King Solomon. And I just thought it was interesting. that they portrayed him as a pharaoh of Egypt. Obviously, Egypt was the neighbor superpower next door to Israel, and so Israel might be copying Egypt. But nevertheless, this artist has portrayed King David with the uraeus of the pharaohs of Egypt and the shepherd's crook symbol, which is used obviously by the pharaohs. So that gives us a clue, perhaps. Perhaps we're talking about Egypt instead of Israel, about an Egyptian king. And it also goes back into Freemasonry, one of these, which is my Freemasonic apron, has a complete history of the United Monarchy. So we don't have to just rely on the biblical record. Freemasonry gives a separate, slightly different history of the United Monarchy because it's all based on the United Monarchy.
That's fascinating.
So this is Grand Lodge in London. This is Grand Lodge, Queen Street in London. Survived the Blitz, which is quite useful, and is superbly symbolic inside. So this is the inside of the Great Hall. And this is all mosaics on the top of the Great Hall. It's well worth a visit, actually. You can go to Grand Lodge and you can get a tour. They do tours, I think 2 tours a day during the week, and you just have to book and go down there. And it's well worth a visit if anyone's interested in the history of not only Freemasonry, but the history of the Old Testament. So this is one of the mosaics. It's a huge mosaic that goes around the top of the Grand Hall. And you can see the chief character is Solomon. Solomon and Hiram Abiff. Now, Hiram Abiff was the architect. We were talking about architects before, with Joseph being called the son of Ptah, Petaseth, the son of Ptah. Well, Ptah was the god of architects, basically, masonry. And Hiram Abiff is the Mason, Freemason, you might say, who made the Temple of Solomon. So this is all a story about the Temple of Solomon. And here we see the 2 pillars. These are probably Yakin and Boaz, the 2 pillars that stood outside the Temple of Jerusalem. Obviously, we've got the Ark of the Covenant in the center here, the stairway to heaven with the 7 steps to get to heaven, symbols of faith, hope, and charity. We've got the Yod. The Yod is the symbol of God in a sun blaze, because effectively the Judaic God is either the sun or the moon. That's where they're derived from. Yah is the moon. Yahweh is the moon. El, Elohim, Adon are all names of the sun god. So we're talking about astronomy, astrology once again. So yeah, that's one of the friezes. This is another one on the other side of the temple. There are mosaics that go all the way around the top of the main hall. And here again, we've got the twin pillars, the famous twin pillars, as in New York. Yakin and Boaz, they're known as. And on top of the twin pillars, we have the globe of the earth and the globe of the cosmos. As you look into the cosmos, it looks like a globe. That's how it's portrayed on any sort of planisphere. So they all knew, even in this early era of the United Monarchy, they knew that the earth was spherical. And that's why they put them on the top of the Temple of Jerusalem, had these globes on the top of the pillars. One of the globe of the earth and the globe of the cosmos. The Star of David, of course, is two pyramids, the Great Pyramid and the Second Pyramid, one upside down. So that's the symbolism of the Star of David. Down the bottom, we've got the rough ashlar down the bottom and the smooth ashlar, symbolic of the new initiate into Freemasonry, that you start as a rough stone and you become smoothed into a good member of society as the smooth ashlar. And then in the center, of course, we've got St. George killing the dragon. So this goes back into antiquity. There's lots of people online saying, oh, St. George and the dragon. George was a knight in Anatolia or something, nothing to do with Britain, you know. No, nonsense. This comes out of Egyptian theology. St. George is Horus, the god Horus. And the god Horus is killing the dragon, in this case portrayed as a crocodile. And so this comes straight out of Egyptian mythology. Horus was the son of Osiris, and the crocodile or dragon is Seth. So here on the left, we see an image of Seth, or Set, as he's known in Egypt, who was the brother of Osiris. There was a war, obviously. It's a bit of a Cain and Abel sort of syndrome, isn't it? A war between Osiris and Seth. And George, or Horus, was the son of Osiris, who eventually vanquishes Set. And here is Horus vanquishing Set. Now, this is from Coptic Church in Egypt. Very common sort of symbolism. You'll see this in Coptic churches, Christian churches, of course, and they portray St. George as Horus killing Seth. And so we can see the Egyptian element within the United Monarchy story. All of this is linked. You know, we've got Solomon and Hiram Abiff, who made the Temple of Solomon. We have George and Horus and Seth, again with the two pillars of the Temple of Solomon. And within Freemasonry, of course, there's a lot of Egyptian within Freemasonry. This is the Philadelphia main lodge, Freemasonic lodge. And as you can see, it's all Egyptian, because it's to do with Egypt. You know, even with the biblical story, the Israelites came out of Egypt. Now, with my new story, it's even closer to Egypt, because the Israelites were the Hyksos. They were the pharaohs who controlled Lower Egypt. And now we've got them coming back into Egypt for the United Monarchy of David and Solomon. So it's all connected to Egypt. Although I think in many cases, the Freemasons don't know this history. They say, because I've discussed this with, relatively, I mean, I'm only in a minor lodge, but I've discussed it with people who have been through the chair at Grand Lodge, and they seem to know nothing of this history. So I think a lot of this history has been lost over the years. It was probably lost after the Knights Templar were destroyed, because the Knights Templar are the forerunners of modern Freemasonry, of course. The one is dependent upon the other.
I was going to say that the red cross on the Freemasonry breast, this is the same as the one on St. George there. This is the flag of England as well.
And the same as the Templar as well, yeah.
Yes. And that depicts this ancient bloodline, is that right? This royal bloodline that has been kept sort of alive over these last couple of thousand years, or are we on the same page with this? Yeah.
The splayed cross is more to do, I mean, it can have other symbolism, of course. Some of these symbols have multiple explanations, but the splayed cross is more to do with the zodiac, the cross of the zodiac. So if you look at I don't have an image here of an Irish cross. If you look at an Celtic Irish cross, it'll have a cross with a big circle around the cross. Very common in Southern Ireland. That is the zodiac. the circle is the zodiac, and the cross is the cross of the zodiac. And the cross of the zodiac marks out the 4 seasons within the annual zodiac. So that's the main route. But you'll find other explanations for the red cross within Templarism, because they do have multiple symbolism. So that sort of sets the scene that we're maybe looking at Egypt instead of Israel, because there is no evidence for the United Monarchy within Israel. Absolutely none. This was the most powerful monarchy in this region, in this era. Monarchs came from all over the known world to give tribute to David and Solomon. There should be some record of these people in the historical record. They were so powerful, so well known, so famous, so rich, so wealthy. There should be some evidence, and there is no evidence within Israel, within Jerusalem, for this united monarchy. So how did we manage to lose this very, very powerful monarchy? Well, as I said before, I think we're looking in the wrong location. I think we need to go and look at Tanis, because when I looked at Tanis, I suddenly found that there were lots of correspondences, lots. So regards later Jerusalem, because obviously they did end up in Jerusalem later, after the Babylonian exile, and so from the 6th century sort of BC, there were many Israelites obviously in Israel. Even during the United Monarchy, the Egyptian monarchy we're going to look at controlled Judea as well. So there were people in Judea at that time anyway. But from Strabo, talking about Judea, Strabo says, Judea is inhabited by a mixed stock of people from Egyptian and Arabian and Phoenician tribes. But though the inhabitants are mixed up thus, the most prevalent of the accredited reports in regard to the Temple of Jerusalem say that the ancestors of the Judeans were Egyptians. Again, it's pointing towards we need to look towards Egypt if we want to find the united monarchy. And so I think what we're looking for is a pharaoh who is linked to King David. And what's King David known for? He's known for his Star of David and his City of David. So perhaps if we can't find the name, maybe we should look for the attributes instead. And so what do we find? Well, we find
back to the hieroglyphics.
Yeah, we've all got to have some hieroglyphics. It's worth being able to read hieroglyphics. It's quite a useful tool in the box, which a lot of historians don't have, I don't think.
No,
this is Susen's 21st, 22nd dynasty. But of course, the Greeks never pronounce any of these names properly. The Greeks managed to bastardize all of these names. So in the Egyptian, we start at the curved end here. We've got I-M-N, Amen, the god Amen. So it's dedicated to the god Amen. This is a cartouche, by the way. So this is a royal title of the pharaoh. The duck is Pa. The star is Siba. This is the horizon, Ka, Kahai. The waves, I think this is water waves, is N again. And then this is a determinative that means region, city, or whatever. So here we have a pharaoh who was known for his city and his star. And the name is Pasibakahayanut. Pasibakahayanut, Susen's to the Greeks, but yeah, they couldn't understand Egyptian, obviously. And here is a pharaoh that's known for his star and his city, the Star of David and the City of David. So how do we get David out of it? How did someone manage to bastardize this name into David? Well, the star can be pronounced as Duad or Dude. And Dude is the name for David in the Old Testament. So yeah, they don't pronounce it as David as we do. That's an anglicized pronunciation. His name is Dude. He's a real dude. And so we could pronounce this as Paduat Kahayanit, King David. So just possibly we might have a King David here. But of course, one name means nothing. What we need is multiple pointers. And, this is something that my critics keep shouting about all the time. Oh, just because the name looks similar doesn't mean they're the same person. True. I generally sort of look for 6 or more pointers that all point in the same direction before I say, yeah, I think this guy, this conflation works. This is the real guy. Here we've got multiple reasons for thinking they are the same person. And we can only go into a few, otherwise we'd be here all day. If anyone wants the full story, you'll need to buy the book.
Yeah. Links
so
below.
Where is Tanis? Tanis is up in the Nile Delta. Mm-hmm. So this is a new city, was built for these. This was an invading dynasty. So these people arrived about 5 generations before the United Monarchy. So they established themselves in this region and then grew up. And then the very powerful 21st, 22nd dynasty grew from those small beginnings, which is pretty much what, the United Monarchy did as well. So this is the small temple in Tanis. Tanis is right up almost against the Mediterranean. It's a long way north. Takes forever when I went there. Gosh, the roads were terrible. It took a full day to go from Cairo to Tanis, and we stayed. There were no hotels. It's only a small place. There were no hotels there, so we stayed in Zagazig, which is sort of halfway up the delta. Zagazig is avarice. We're back to the same old places again. There's a new town there, obviously, called Zagazig, and it still took 2-3 hours to get from Zagazig to go up to Tanis. So if anyone did but know it, this is the Temple of Solomon. Probably this one. I mean, there were two temples. There was the main temple and a small temple, but this is the better constructed, I would say. And it was using all these old granite pillars. Now, these are all stolen. These are all pillaged. Pillaged twice, probably. These are ancient. These are old kingdom. They didn't make pillars like this because sculpting granite is actually very difficult, as you might expect. And these are absolutely pristine, perfect. It's very typical of old kingdom sort of stonework. So I think these were pillaged from much earlier temples, maybe even Heliopolis or something, and were taken to Avaris by Ramesses, by the Ramesside pharaohs, because most of these have got the name of Ramesses II. Ramesses II was known as the great chiseler, because he just carved his name into all sorts of places that he did not construct and didn't make, but he claimed them for his own. So a lot of these have the name of Ramesses the Great on it.
Yeah. Was he the red-haired pharaoh as well? Was this Ramesses the first or second?
Yes, Ramesses the Great was the redhead. So yeah, we're talking about the Ginger monarchy again here. Ramesses the Great, his mummy was decaying somewhat. And so they took it to France for preservation. And so they took it to the French forensic labs. And Pierre Calcaldi, who was the chief scientist there, did a full investigation of his body. And he said that Ramesses the Great was a fair-skinned, ginger-haired man with wavy ginger hair. True ginger, nothing to do with the mummification process. Different chemicals, obviously. Ginger hair is caused by melanin. There are two types of melanin, and it depends on the ratio between these two types, whether you're blonde or whether you're dark-haired. So yes, this was a temple of Ramesses II using borrowed pillars, in my estimation, and that temple was at Avaris by Ramesses. But Pi-Ramesses fell out of favor. There are two possible reasons here. A, Pi-Ramesses was too far south for these new invaders, so it might be too close to, enemy territory, as it were. Secondly, Pi-Ramesses is thought to have silted up. It was on a branch of the Nile, but it's thought to have silted up at about this time, so it was worthless for commerce and trade. And so they moved the whole city to Tanis, which is quite an undertaking, if you could imagine taking all of these pillars and shifting them, another, I don't know how far it is actually, 70 kilometers or so further north. Anyway, however far it is. And they created Tanis, which is again used to be on a branch of the Nile. I don't think it is anymore. It's silted up again. They keep doing this. All of the branches keep moving. So here's one of the pillars, and you can see the top of this pillar is absolutely marvelous. Yeah, this is granite this granite has come up from Thebes, from the great Aswan quarries down in Thebes.
Wow.
Well, south of Thebes, actually. And you can see it's been usurped. You can see this nice round pattern here, and then this flap that comes down, very reminiscent of the kings of Parthia that I talk about.
Mm. And this Tanis is another name for Zoan. Is that right?
This is Zoan. Sorry, yes. I haven't mentioned that. Yeah, Tanis is Zoan. And then some idiot has come along with a chisel and carved these hieroglyphs into the top. I mean, why didn't he carve it over here or something? Into the decoration at the top of the capital of this pillar.
Some people, Ralph,
Some people. This is definitely of a fine piece of artistry. And this is not a cartouche. This is, what does this say? This says Nefertiti, which means the good god. Nefer is good or beautiful. And Neter is the god flag used all over Egypt. Nefertiti means the good god. It's often a name for Osiris, but it just means, the good god. Down here, this one I know, this is Kemet. So we've got the crocodile glyph, and this is a T. This is the region or the city. Kemet is the name for Egypt. It's the old name. It was known as Kam or Kemet, meaning the black lands of the dark soil of Egypt, as against the red lands, which is the desert. And then Can. In these circumstances, you need a hieroglyph dictionary. That's volume 1.
Wow. You've put a bit of time into this, Ralph.
Well, I do this. This is volume 2.
Yeah.
They're both that big.
That's wild. Yeah, fantastic.
And it's it's sorted in English, so you can easily look these things up. So we got K, and they've sorted it in the alphabetic for English. So M, Cam, black, Cam, Can, MN, yes. Camu, okay, it means garden. Cam, yeah, so this is a Ka, which can mean your name or your soul, but it just means it's a consonant Ka. And then this is N at the bottom, Kan, and it means garden. So that makes sense, actually. This is the good god of the Garden of Egypt. Sort of makes sense, doesn't it? And effectively, this is what we were talking about before, with Eden being the Garden of Eden. Well, this is the Garden of Egypt, the good god of the Garden of Egypt. So yes, there are, people could translate this as being the Garden of Eden, as it were. So yeah, there you go. So that's the small temple. This is the main drag in Tanis, which is Zoan, as you said. Most of it has been destroyed and pillaged and taken, so there's only random blocks left. But it was a fine major city in its day. We're talking from 1100s BC, so just after the Sea People invasion, this became a major city. And these are the tombs. And these were intact.
Wow.
And the contents were better than the contents, I would say, in the tomb of Tutankhamun.
Wow.
So
Okay.
these were discovered by Pierre Montet, 1939. It's one of the reasons why it went off the radar, because someone started a world war at that time. So, there was not much mentioned about this. And then when I went to, it's all changed now. They've got a new museum. But when I went to the Cairo Museum, I was searching for this. Down one end of the corridor, there was 1,000 people. Slight exaggeration, maybe 300, because they were looking at the room with Tutankhamun in it. I was down the other end looking at this room, which is the room of the Tanite kings.
And the
there were no
Tanite kings. This
Yeah,
is David, Solomon. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see why
We'll come
it's
to
David
this.
and Solomon in a minute. But
Yeah.
of course, nobody knows that. So
Yes,
nobody
yes,
goes
yes, yes.
down that end of the corridor.
Yeah.
And it was in total darkness because they'd had a power cut. And there's me trying to get pictures for a book. And, there's no... So I had to go down and get the curator. And he came out with a wonder lamp and plugged this in, and 50 meters of cable to get a lamp down there so I could take some pictures. They wouldn't allow... You're not allowed to take in any tripods or anything for your camera. So I had no light. You're not allowed to use any flash. So I'm trying to take a picture holding the camera as still as possible, but you've got to have a wide setting because it's not very bright. He's only got this stupid little wonder lamp. That was all a bit difficult. So we'll come back to that because we've got to explain why I think... So I need to stop sharing. There we go. Why I think these two dynasties are connected. So we've seen the Star of David, City of David, and the guy was named Dude. And the main reason is all the names are the same. So we have two dynasties here. We have the United Monarchy in the biblical text, and we have the 21st, 22nd dynasties of Tanis. And so we've got two king lists, and we can put them next to each other and have a look at them and see whether they're similar or not. And so from the biblical texts, we get Ezron, which could be, because we're talking about the end of the Ramesside pharaohs, because the Ramesside pharaohs go up to Ramesses the seventh, I think, was the last of the Ramessides. That could be a reversal of Ezram, Ramesses, Ezron, Ezram. It's possible. Then we have Ram from the Bible, which could be Ramesses, sounds very similar. Then we have Aminadab from the Bible, which could be Amenemneb, because one of the pharaohs, of course, was Amenesbenebjed, Amenemneb, Aminadab. Very similar. Then we have from the Bible, we have Nashon, which could be Neshu, Amenemneshu, one of the pharaohs of the 21st dynasty. Then from the Bible, Salmon, which could be Siamun. And these are all in the same order. They're not random. This is in the same order going down the two dynasties. And then we have Boaz, the famous Boaz from the pillar of the temple of Solomon. So Boaz and Buasorkon. Boaz and Boaz. Sounds the same. And then we have Obed from the Bible and Amenemobed. Obed.
Sure, it's a coincidence.
Yeah, they're just very, very similar.
Yeah.
And so we have the beginnings of a conflation between these two dynasties. And then we have the this story goes on for about 3 chapters. This one's very convoluted. We have the daughter of King David, who is not given, but there's 2 daughters. And if you work your way through the whole of the Kings and Chronicles, it's quite obvious that Makkah is Tamar. So we have these 2 women, and it's quite obvious that one is a name and one is a title. And so her name will be Makkah Tamar. So that's the daughter of King David. Now, the daughter of Susens, Pasiba Kahayanit, was Makara Mutamhut. Makkah Tamar, Makara Mutamhut.
Mm-hmm.
Same name. Sounds like it.
Certainly. Where is this? Sorry, just one quick question. Where is the non-biblical history recorded? Who's the main authoritative sources of that? Sorry.
Lots of places. We have a relatively good
historical record of this period.
Yeah, the main one is Redford, who's got all of the history of the. I'm just looking for his book. Can't see it there, but there is lots of classical histories of this region. And they have the mummies that came out of Tanis, because we'll have a look at the mummies. So we've got all of their names. And on the mummy wrappings, they have a lot of names on the mummy wrappings as well. And so there's quite a lot of documentation has come out of the Tanite dynasty. So we know their names. We know roughly the order in which those kings reigned. We know a lot of their family. We even know them from their cutlery and crockery, because their names, they stamped their names on their crockery, because it was made of gold. You don't want anyone just running off with your nice gold bowls and plates and whatever. So we have a lot of the names from these records. It's not like looking at the early 18th dynasty, which is, you don't get too much information. But with the Tanite kings, we've got quite a lot of information on them. And that's why we can be sure. Well, we'll look at Makkah Tamar because we've got a mummy. So we know quite a lot about them. And
Josephus mentioned them as well. Is this part of that, or?
Well, yes, but only from the biblical perspective. So we get two biblical versions. So we get the Bible and then Josephus, who tells us the complete story again of the United Monarchy from a slightly different perspective. So again, we get two records here. We get the sort of spiritual fantasy version from the Old Testament, and then from Josephus we get a more rational, secular version of the same story, which does give different data, which is good. So you can compare the two and pick a median between the two, maybe. Or I think Josephus is the more accurate of the two. And so we get the full story there, and it dovetails very nicely with what was happening in the Tanite dynasty as well. And one of the best ones I like is this one. We'll see this guy in a minute. Is King David's general. So King David was a very powerful monarch. He had 3 generals, and all of his generals were the commanders of thousands. So you can see again that King David had a large army, which Jerusalem never had in the 10th century BC. So here's a monarch that has thousands and thousands of men in his army. And he has 3 commanders, so it's split into 3. One of those commanders is called Joab. And that's interesting because the commander of Susan's was called Joab and Jed. Joab? Sounds like the same man to me. More than that, King David says, it says of King David, 2 Samuel 18:1, if anyone wants to look it up. King David numbered the people and set captains of thousands and captains of hundreds over them, over his army. And David sent forth a third part of the people under the hand of Joab, a third part under Abishai, and a third part under Ittai. They are the 3 commanders of thousands. So Joab, in the biblical text, is the commander of thousands. But Joab, in Egyptian, means 10,000. So his very name, Joab and Jed, means the commander of thousands. It's the same. I mean, how many coincidences and similarities do we need before we declare that these 2 dynasties are the same? I think we have sufficient information to declare they are the same. And we have, I'm just doing a screen share.
Yep, no worries. Work away. Yeah, these aren't one or two strenuous links. It is just one after another, after another, after another of these. Yeah.
Link after link after link.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Again, as I said before, it's not merely a similar name. We have multiple similar names and multiple similar histories as well. You know, their battles, their trials and tribulations, all are fairly similar. It sounds like the same dynasty. So this is where they found all of this. This is the Tanite tombs. There's no rock here, of course. We're up in the Nile Delta. It's all based on sand. So they had to bring all of this material in to make the tombs. So they've constructed these tombs and buried them in sand. And they were found intact in 1939 by Piemontet. And they were brought out, and they were some of the most fantastic tombs ever discovered in Egypt, which is why it's so strange that all of these people in the museum were down at the Tutankhamun side, and nobody was up at the Tanite side when their artifacts are probably as good, if not better, than Tutankhamun. This is the
shepherd's hook again.
Yeah, with the shepherd's crook and the flail. The shepherd's crook and flail, that's interesting since you mentioned it there. The flail is for herding sheep. Sorry, what am I talking about? The flail is for herding bulls. You don't want to spook a bull too much, so you hit its bum with
Yes.
a flail.
Yeah,
Not
yeah.
too hard. Keep it gentle, otherwise you're going to have an angry bull.
We use an old pipe
Um,
here in Ireland. I've heard it a few cattle.
right.
That was hilarious. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the
So you've
shepherd's
got
crook, of course, is for sheep.
this is the crossover between the zodiacal ages. Yes,
Yeah.
all of Taurus and Aries. Then this.
So astronomically speaking, we have the great month of Taurus and the great month of Aries. And this symbolism started, as far as I can see, at the turn of the ages, so about 1800 BC. This type of symbolism. I did a quick survey of all of the mummies going back into antiquity. And this symbolism started at the turn of the great month of Taurus turning into the great month of Aries. So again,
yeah,
everything is
another
astronomical,
coincidence.
astrological.
Yeah,
That's the symbolism of the pharaohs, because they were the keepers of these secrets, you know. They weren't just symbolic of their age, because obviously this is a long time after that age. This is 750 years, 800 years after the turn of the constellation. But the pharaohs were the keepers of these secrets. And this was a symbol of them understanding the ways of the cosmos. So this is Susens, Pasipa Kahayanet, Paduat Kahayanet, or King David in common terms.
this is
So
King
this
David.
would be the sarcophagus, and this is solid silver.
Wow.
And silver in this era was supposed to be much more expensive than gold. So this is a stupendously expensive sarcophagus. And yeah, fantastic detailing all the way down it. And this was his death mask, which was inside the sarcophagus, of course. This is the death, solid gold, nothing less.
Unbelievable. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And so this would be a very unique one, the sarcophagus of King Solomon. Now, I think this was usurped because this, in my books, was the sarcophagus for the chief son of King David, who was Absalom. But Absalom started an uprising against his father, and he had him killed with 3 blows to the head. Very Masonic, if you know your Masonry. Is the 3 Dewey's killing Hiram Abiff with 3 blows to the head. It's a very, very similar story to the Masonic story. And so this sarcophagus, because this Horus is obviously Horus, as we can see. So this is St. George. Going back to St. George and the Dragon, this is St. George. This would have been for Absalom, but obviously Absalom was now dead, and so it was usurped by Solomon. And this would be his sarcophagus. And this is his, and again, solid silver. Unknown in Egypt, we don't get solid silver sarcophagi, not even in the 18th dynasty of Tutankhamun. And this is his death mask. Fantastic piece of artistry there. Very lifelike. One presumes that's exactly what he looked like. If we have any of these Afrocentrisms following this story, no, he's not Black African. No. He'd be, again, of this dynasty, linked to the Ramesside. We've already seen that the Ramesside dynasty were ginger. These people would be as well, because I think these are returning Hyksos, returning a Mana dynasty, coming back with the Sea People invasion. I think these would have been redheads as well. And King David is said to be a redhead within the Old Testament. He's said to be ruddy. Now, some people will start moaning and groaning and saying that in the Song of Solomon, it says that he had raven black hair. His hair was black as a raven. Again, I think there are lots of mistranslations in the English because it sounded reasonable to them, black as a raven. But the term black and raven means, if you want to interpret it slightly differently, straight out of the Aramaic, it translates as the sunrise and the sunset. So we get a perfect dualism. And of course, if you're writing a story, you want these dualisms. It's part of how you write these stories, to make them flow. So he looked like the sunrise and the sunset. And what's that? It's red, isn't it? And King David was described as being red. And so his hair would be like the sunrise and sunset. It would be red hair. So yeah, Ginger Dynasty again. Yeah, you were going to say something.
It was just there's a big discrepancy there between sort of this English translation and what you were saying coming from that original more so. What do you think's happened there?
This is the trouble when you're translating something.
Yeah.
Your biases will show through because most of these words coming out of the Hebrew Aramaic will have 2 or 3 different meanings. So context is everything. And if in the back of your mind, you're thinking that everyone from Egypt has black hair, you're going to translate it as black as a raven. If you know nothing about the Ginger dynasty. But if you know about the Ginger monarchy, you might say, oh, sunrise and sunset. That makes more sense. And this happens, we'll see this, with the New Testament. There have been so many mistranslations. Carpenter for Jesus. He's not called a carpenter at all. He's called a tecton. And a tecton is an architect. We still use the same word today. Architect, archi means the chief, tect means a mason, a Freemason. So Jesus was the Grand Master of the Freemasonic Lodge of Judea. Nothing to do with carpentry. He was a Freemason. And that is why when you look at the raising of Lazarus, the Lazarus is a 3rd degree raising. Exactly the same. I went through exactly the same process in the 3rd degree. And the 3rd degree, which we'll come on to in a minute, I think, because I've got some of it here, is all about the Temple of Solomon. So if Jesus was descended from King David, which they try to make out, within the New Testament, of course he would have the same traditions as King David, and King David was the first of the Freemasons. So that's why he was called a tecton. He was called an architect, but not a operative architect, but a speculative architect, a Freemason. So Jesus was the Grand Master of the Judean Lodge.
And so Joseph, again, this other sort of god worshipped in, Joseph in Freemasonry. Then he's just one of the, is he like the great grandfather type thing then of King David? He's still just part of this lineage as we've been working out from the last.
He's not the main character. Joseph is not the Old Testament. Joseph is not the main character within Freemasonry. The main character that is venerated is not King David, not King Solomon. It's Hiram Abiff, who is the chief architect. So they're not even looking at the monarchy as being their primary hero of Freemasonry. They're looking at the architects, presumably because they had a similar organization running at that time. So, and remember, like Freemasonry today, the chief architects would have been from the royal family anyway. The chief Freemason, I think he's still there, was the Duke of Kent, all connected to the royal family. So the royal family and Freemasonry are sort of interlocked. Most of the minor royals were something to do with Freemasonry. And the same happened in the United Monarchy. So you can bet your bottom dollar that Hiram Abiff would have been linked to the monarchy. And he was the chief architect. He was the chief Freemason. And that is the hero of Freemasonry. He is the guy who gets killed by the three Jewees because all of their names begin with the same consonants. And he's the one who's buried and is raised from the dead after 3 days. That is the raising from the dead. Jesus wasn't the first to be raised to the dead. The raising from the dead of Hiram Abiff is the third degree. That's what you go through in the third degree initiation, is the raising from the dead. Part of the dying and rising gods that have been going on for forever. You can bet your bottom dollar this is based on Osiris, who did the same. Osiris was one of the dying and rising gods. These are old stories that have been told and retold over generations and millennia.
Mithras and things, and me and Michael did an episode there that'll be coming out. I'm sure people might watch it before this one's released, where we just do astrotheology and go through all of these sort of things. So I'll tell you perfectly what we've been doing.
All interlinked, and Michael knows a lot about this as well. Well worth watching. So do tune into that, and you'll find out a lot of good new information. And so this is Joab. This is the chief army commander of King David and of Susens, Joab and Jed. Again, a very nice solid gold mask of Joab. This is the guy that's mentioned in the Old Testament, in Kings and Chronicles, chief commander of thousands, because his name means thousands. So this is the interesting thing about this. Everyone's been looking for the United Monarchy for decades, for centuries. Here they are.
See it here first.
We not only know of them, we have all of their mummies, and we have their sarcophagi, we have their death masks, we have everything. And you mention this, whether it be to Finkelstein or whether it be to theologians and rabbis, whatever. And they'll say, no, it's not. We don't want to find our King David. Well, we do want to find our King David and King Solomon, but we want to find him in Jerusalem. We don't want to find him in Egypt. So we're going to reject this. As someone said to me, I think it was Finkelstein, it doesn't matter that all of their names are the same. They're still not the same people.
That's crazy, isn't it? Yeah, the mental gymnastics.
Because it's upsetting. Whether you're a theologian or whether you're an academic, it means that you have been teaching wrong information for the last, 40 years, whatever it happens to be. Your whole life has been a lie, effectively, teaching the wrong information to people. It's very difficult to admit that to yourself and to others, that you've been wrong for 40 years. And it's political as well, because it means that the Temple of Jerusalem should be in Egypt, not on the Temple Mount. The temple that was built on the Temple Mount was a very poor copy after the Babylonian exile, which is not normally counted as a Temple of Jerusalem. But the main one, of course, that was built there was the Temple of Herod. And that was built. We know that that was a real thing. But that wasn't until the 1st century BC. This is like 900 years later. The first temple got built on the Temple Mount. The original temple of Jerusalem would have been in Tanis. And it has the same name, virtually. The temple in the smaller temple we looked at was the Hetkar Ptah. And the Temple of Jerusalem was the Haikal Yahweh. Hetkar Ptah, Haikal Yahweh. Yeah, well, apart from the god name changing from Ptah to Yahweh,
Yahweh.
it's pretty much the same. And that's one of the reasons I think it was the small temple at Tanis was the real temple of Solomon. So yes, it becomes all political. People won't like this. They won't accept this. And so it has been and will be rejected. But I think this is the truth, that we have found the United Monarchy, because this was what we're looking for. We were looking for a very powerful, very wealthy monarchy where monarchs came from all over the region to pay tribute and homage to these kings. Well, that's exactly what they did, because the Tanite kings were the most powerful kings in this region. More powerful than any priest kings down in Thebes, because remember, Egypt was divided again. More powerful than any kings, minor kings in the Levant, in the Near East. As powerful as any kings in Mesopotamia. These were the most powerful kings in this region, and people did come from all over to pay tribute to these kings. And that's exactly what is said about the United Monarchy. So, yeah, that is the United Monarchy. And it's all wrapped up with Freemasonry. And Freemasonry is all based upon the Great Pyramid, because the Great Pyramid, in Freemasonry, some people say that it was not the Temple of Solomon that was built as the centerpiece of Freemasonry. It was the Great Pyramid that was built. So some people transfer this right back into Egypt. And the Great Pyramid was, well, we've already seen in the last talk that it was Mount Sinai. It was the mountain of the Israelites. And it was the mountain of astronomy and astrology, because it always had a platform on the top, and therefore it always had, what am I looking for? A stairway going to the top, the stairway to heaven. That stairway to heaven used to run up to the Sun Temple, and the Sun Temple is the Great Pyramid, because it had a platform on the top where you could do your stellar observations, because these were Sabaeans. If you're a Sabaean, a star worshipper, an astronomer, you need to be able to observe the cosmos. And you can't do that around Cairo, because even then, I imagine it was covered in the smoke of all their fires all the time. So you need to go to the top of the Great Pyramid, and there you can do your observations. And I'm pretty sure that the Great Pyramid always had a platform on the top, because if you go down to Abydos, you'll see this kiosk. This is the roof of a kiosk. A kiosk is like a telephone box, basically, but it contained the shrine of the gods, and it's made from a single piece of granite, and some of the most marvelous workmanship you've ever seen. Inexplicable workmanship. I mean, this has been cut by circular saws and so on, and tube drills and whatever, far beyond what they should be able to do in the Bronze Age, because this is Old Kingdom. But note that the top of this kiosk is a pyramid, of course. And note on the top of it, it has a platform on the top. So I think this kiosk is a representation of the Great Pyramid of Giza. And they put that little platform on the top of this because the Great Pyramid had a platform on the top. And it had a set of steps going up there. And we still have this, of course, within modern Freemasonry, because in America they say exactly the same. The New World Order the pyramid with a platform on the top, upon which is the all-seeing eye. And that platform on the top is this one here, which is on the top of the Great Pyramid.
And most of the founding fathers, these were all Freemasons. This is well known as well too, isn't that correct? Yeah, yeah.
So they would have known these traditions that have come out from Freemasonry, which are parallel to the biblical record, but separate from the biblical record. So their traditions are very slightly similar. Very slightly different. Similar but different. So you get a different viewpoint on these old histories and traditions.
And who do you? I was just wondering, where do you date the pyramids, and who was sort of the pharaoh in charge of constructing them? Where does that line up
that's
to?
a whole topic
Is this another?
into itself.
We'll leave it to a
I
separate
tend to
thing,
go
will we?
back beyond the Old Kingdom. I still think, despite some of the carbon-14 dating they've been trying to do recently, I still think that the megalithic pyramids are ancient. We're talking 10,000 years ancient. That's not been proven, of course, but I did some astrotheology on these, and we can talk about that in a separate talk. But there are indications from astrotheology that these pyramids were made at a much earlier time.
Yeah. In the age of Leo, was it? And these kind of things, before the Sphinx lines up, and Well,
yes, but which age of Leo? Because Leo returns every 26,000 years.
Yes. Yeah.
So in one of my more radical datings, I dated it to 66,000 years ago.
Wow. Yeah.
As an earlier age of Leo, because it repeats, of course, it's a 26,000 year cycle.
We'll bookmark that to do a separate talk on then the pyramids. If that sounds all right with you.
Talk,
yeah. I'd love to come back to that.
Again, that's speculative because there is no definite proof of any of this, but all you can do is look at the alignments and say, yes, this lines up with this particular date. So it is a possibility.